League of Legends has always been a game of balance, or at least an attempt at it. Over the years, champions have been released, buffed, nerfed, and reworked, but some have stood out for all the wrong reasons. These are the champions that didn't just break the gameplay, they shattered it, leaving players scratching their heads and wondering how something so overpowered made it past testing. Think about Akali and her Twilight Shroud. True stealth, insane outplay potential, and an ability to vanish into thin air right when you think you've got her. Or the old Kassadin who could rift walk into fights, delete squishies, and rift walk right back out like nothing happened. Then there's Leauge, who felt like a math problem disguised as a champion, packing enough tools to feel like 5 champions in one. These names instantly spark frustration and nostalgia in equal measure. But among the long list of infamous champions, there's one that takes the cake. A champion so broken, so overpowered, that Riot seemed desperate to sweep them under the rug. This is the story of that champion, the one who left the entire community questioning what Riot was thinking. In the early days of League of Legends, champion design was rooted in simplicity. Champions like Ashe, Garen, and Annie were created with straightforward kits that prioritized accessibility. These champions were easy to pick up and play, catering to a game that sought to reach a wider audience than its predecessor, Dota. Riot's approach made League of Legends appealing to new players while establishing a strong foundation for growth. However, as the game matured, the focus shifted toward more intricate and nuanced champion designs. This shift introduced champions like Lee Sin, Riven, and Yasuo, whose kits emphasized skill expression and mechanical mastery. These champions rewarded precision, creative play, and a deep knowledge of the game, adding new layers of depth to League's gameplay. While this evolution was exciting, it also presented new challenges. The balance between accessibility and complexity became increasingly difficult to maintain. Champions designed to appeal to high-skill players often left casual players feeling overwhelmed. This disparity led to growing concerns within the community, particularly when champions became oppressive in the hands of skilled players while being ineffective for less experienced ones. Yorick, the Shepherd of Souls, is a prime example of Riot's early struggles with champion design. Released in 2011, Yorick was introduced as a gravedigger with the ability to summon ghouls. The concept was innovative, but the execution left much to be desired. His kit was clunky and unpolished, and with abilities that felt unresponsive and lacked counterplay, Yorick's reliance on ghouls created a feast or famine dynamic. When his ghouls were active, he could dominate his lane, overwhelming opponents with sustain and damage. However, without them, he became significantly weaker, leaving him vulnerable and ineffective. This binary playstyle frustrated both the Yorick players and their opponents. Despite his unique concept, Yorick's gameplay issues made him one of the least popular champions in League's history. His unclear identity and limited utility rendered him ineffective in both casual and competitive play. Yorick's early design highlights the challenges Riot faced in balancing innovation with playability. However, his story also exemplifies Riot's willingness to revisit past mistakes. Yorick's eventual rework in 2016 demonstrated the company's commitment to refining outdated designs and delivering a better experience for players. Yorick's release didn't just struggle with clunkiness, it also carried a reputation for being overwhelmingly overpowered in certain scenarios. His ghouls, which were central to his kit, could stack damage to absurd levels, especially when left unchecked. Players who mastered his playstyle found ways to abuse this mechanic, creating situations where Yorick could snowball uncontrollably in lane. His ability to summon multiple ghouls allowed him to win trades effortlessly, heal himself with Omen of Famine, and apply unrelenting pressure on turrets. Against opponents unfamiliar with his mechanics, Yorick became a nightmare capable of overwhelming them with sheer numbers. But this brokenness came at a cost. His design was polarizing and one-dimensional. Yorick's ultimate ability, Omen of Death, further exacerbated his imbalance. By resurrecting an allied champion as a controllable ghost, Yorick could essentially turn a fight into a 6v5 under the right conditions. This was particularly oppressive in coordinated play, where resurrected allies could continue dealing massive damage after death. However, The ability's potential was often overshadowed by its awkward execution and situational nature, which left many players frustrated. Despite its flaws, Omen of Death's raw power, when optimized, added to the perception of Yorick as a champion who was either useless or game-breaking. No middle ground. He was a clunky liability, lacking the tools to meaningfully contribute to team fights. This feast or famine dynamic not only frustrated players, but also highlighted Riot's struggles in balancing innovative concepts with practical gameplay. Adding to his notoriety was the lack of clear counterplay. His ghouls, while integral to his kit, often felt unfair. They dealt significant damage while being difficult to target and eliminate, especially for champions with limited area of effect abilities. Additionally, Yorick's reliance on mana forced him into itemization paths like Manamune, which, while effective, further restricted his build diversity. The result was a champion that felt both oppressive and clunky, a combination that earned him a reputation as one of the most polarizing champions in League's history. Yorick's brokenness wasn't just a gameplay issue, it became a community meme. Players joked about his obscurity with phrases like, "Who plays Yorick?" becoming commonplace. His low pick rate combined with his high win rate in certain niches cemented him as a champion who was simultaneously forgotten and infamous. Riot's acknowledgement of these issues eventually led to his rework, but the journey to redemption was far from smooth. Yorick's brokenness wasn't just a mechanical flaw, it was an experience. Anyone who played against him during his prime knows the frustration of watching those ghouls shred your health bar while you desperately tried to keep them off. It wasn't just that they were strong, it was how unfair they felt. Targeting them was a chore, their damage stacked up too quickly, and Yorick's sustain through Omen of Famine meant that trades were almost always in his favor. It often felt like playing against Yorick was less about skill and more about enduring an uphill battle that you weren't equipped to win. And if you've ever been turret divided by Yorick and his army of ghouls, you probably still feel a pang of annoyance just thinking about it. His ultimate, Omen of Death, had its own reputation. The idea of resurrecting an ally sounds exciting, but in Yorick's hands it often felt oppressive. A dead champion returning to life with full damage output was already daunting, but when paired with Yorick's other abilities, it created chaotic team fights that felt impossible to manage. This ability wasn't just powerful, it was game-changing when used correctly. Yet, in typical Yorick fashion, it was also clunky and situational, making it feel inconsistent even when it succeeded. It was the ultimate win harder button, which only added to the divisiveness surrounding his kit. For many in the League community, Yorick was the champion you didn't want to see, whether on the enemy team or on your own. Playing against him was infuriating because of his oppressive lane phase, while having him on your team felt like a gamble. Was this Yorick going to carry the game with his absurd split push potential, or was he going to be completely useless the moment the laning phase ended? That uncertainty made him one of the least trusted champions in the roster, both in solo queue and beyond. But let's be honest, some players loved him precisely because of this. Yorick's mains were a special breed, thriving on the frustration they caused others. They knew how to manipulate his strengths, turn his weaknesses into advantages, and summon an unrelenting army of ghouls to terrorize lanes. For them, Yorick wasn't broken, he was misunderstood, a niche pick that rewarded those who were willing to master his unconventional playstyle. And in a way, they weren't entirely wrong. Yorick did have a unique charm, even if that charm was buried beneath layers of clunkiness and imbalance. What Riot underestimated was how polarizing Yorick's design would be for the community. His feast or famine gameplay, combined with his overwhelming power in certain situations, made him a symbol of Riot's early struggles with balance and innovation. Some champions are remembered fondly for their creativity and design. Yorick, on the other hand, became infamous for all the wrong reasons, and that's what made him unforgettable. Yorick's issues weren't just about frustrating gameplay mechanics, they represented a broader challenge Riot faced during League of Legends' early years. Designing champions with unique kits was one thing. Making those kits feel fair and balanced across all levels of play was an entirely different task. In Yorick's case, Riot's ambition to create an innovative ghoul-summoning juggernaut clashed with the reality of poor execution. His overwhelming power in niche scenarios contrasted sharply with his glaring weakness, resulting in a champion who never quite fit into the broader meta. For the average player, Yorick was a nightmare in lane. His sustain through Omen of Famine and the raw damage from his ghouls made him nearly impossible to deal with in extended trades. However, outside of his lane, his impact dwindled. His abilities lacked synergy with most team compositions, and his clunky mechanics meant he often struggled to keep up with the faster, more dynamic champions of the time. But when Yorick worked, he really worked. His oppressive laning phase could snowball into a relentless split-push machine, pressuring turrets with ghouls while the rest of his team handled objectives. This imbalance, dominant in one aspect of the game but borderline useless in another, wasn't unique to Yorick, but it felt especially pronounced in his case. Champions like Tryndamere and Nasus have been long associated with split pushing, but they brought more consistency and clarity to their roles. Yorick, on the other hand, felt like a coin flip. Would he be the unstoppable gravedigger marching down lanes with an army of ghouls, or would he flounder in teamfights, unable to contribute meaningfully? The inconsistency was part of what made Yorick's brokenness so infamous. It wasn't just that he was strong, but that his strength felt so situational. For Riot, this created a dilemma. On one hand, champions like Yorick highlighted the potential for innovative design that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in a MOBA. On the other hand, his clunky gameplay and polarizing power level alienated large portions of the player base. Riot's willingness to experiment was commendable, but it became clear that some experiments, like Yorick's original design, missed the mark. Yorick's reputation as a forgotten champion cemented itself over time, not because he wasn't viable, but because Riot struggled to give him a clear identity. The community's memes about Yorick, often jokingly referring to him as the least played champion, reflected a shared frustration. How could a champion with such a unique concept end up feeling so lackluster? Riot's eventual decision to rework Yorick wasn't just about addressing his broken mechanics, it was about giving him the thematic and gameplay identity he had always deserved. Yorick's eventual rework in 2016 marked a turning point, not just for the champion, but for Riot's approach to revitalizing outdated designs. The original Yorick's clunky gameplay and frustrating mechanics had long been a sore spot for the community. Riot knew that simply tweaking numbers wouldn't be enough. His entire identity needed a fresh perspective. This rework wasn't just about fixing Yorick, it was about proving that even the most divisive champion could be reborn into something memorable and meaningful. The reworked Yorick retained the core of his original concept, summoning minions to fight by his side. However, Riot refined this idea into something far more engaging. The introduction of the Maiden of the Mist added a new layer of strategy to his kit. This spectral ally acted as a force multiplier, enabling Yorick to exert pressure on specific parts of the map. Unlike his old ghouls, which often felt uncontrollable and unwieldy, the Maiden provided a sense of purpose and agency to his gameplay. Players who mastered Yorick now had to think critically about when and where to deploy her, adding depth without unnecessary complexity. The rework also addressed one of Yorick's biggest criticisms, his lack of clear counterplay. His updated kit allowed enemies to interact with his abilities in meaningful ways. The ghouls became more predictable and manageable, while the Maiden's presence on the map provided visual and strategic cues for opponents. These changes didn't just make Yorick more balanced, they made him more satisfying to play against. The frustrating, unstoppable lane bully of the past had evolved into a more strategic and dynamic champion, capable of influencing the game in nuanced ways. Visually, the rework elevated Yorick's design to match his thematic potential. His new look, heavily influenced by the haunting atmosphere of the Shadow Isles, solidified his place within League's growing lore. No longer generic gravedigger, Yorick became a tragic figure, one burdened with the task of redeeming the souls trapped in the Shadow Isles. His connection to the Maiden of the Mist deepened his story, presenting him not just as a fighter, but as a shepherd of lost souls seeking redemption in a cursed world. The rework wasn't just a gameplay update, it was a narrative triumph. For players who had dismissed Yorick as a relic of League's past, this reimagination brought him back into the spotlight. He still wasn't a common pick, but for those who enjoyed his unique playstyle, the rework felt like a love letter to everything they hoped Yorick could become. Despite his improvements, Yorick remained a niche champion, a favorite among dedicated mains but rarely seen in professional play. His split-pushing potential and map control made him a powerful asset in the right hands, but his limited utility in teamfights and slower pace kept him from becoming a staple in the meta. However, this wasn't seen as a failure. In fact, it was a testament to Riot's ability to strike a balance between preserving his unique identity and modernizing his gameplay. Yorick's rework proved that not every champion needed to dominate the meta to feel rewarding and meaningful. Yorick's rework wasn't just a success, it was a statement. It showed that no champion, no matter how flawed or forgotten, was beyond saving. Riot's willingness to revisit Yorick's design and bring him up to modern standards demonstrated a commitment to both innovation and their player base. By preserving his core identity while addressing his weakness, Riot managed to turn one of the league's most polarizing champions into a niche but beloved pick. For many players, Yorick's transformation is a reminder of the game's broader evolution. League of Legends started as a simple MOBA with basic designs and limited mechanics, but over the years, it has grown into something far greater. Champions like Yorick embody the risks Riot takes to push boundaries, even when the results are polarizing. His journey from an obscure gravedigger to haunting shepherd of souls reflects Riot's ability to learn from missteps and refine their approach. But Yorick's story doesn't end with his rework. He remains a symbol of Riot's philosophy. Every champion has the potential to be meaningful and unique, even if it takes years to unlock that potential. The addition of lore-rich storytelling, stunning visuals, and cohesive mechanics turned Yorick into more than just a playable champion. He became a fully realized character in a world teeming with history and emotion. League of Legends continues to evolve, and with it, so do its champions. Yorick's journey serves as a reminder of Riot's dedication to innovation and their willingness to take risks, even when it means revisiting old designs. His story poses an important question for the community. What other forgotten champions could benefit from a second chance? What do you think? Should Riot revisit more forgotten champions, or are some designs best left in the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.